For more than 200 years, scientists believed they understood crocodiles, ancient, simple, cold-blooded killing machines that had barely changed since the age of dinosaurs and had nothing left to teach us. That belief just collapsed. Researchers have recently discovered that crocodiles can reproduce without any male involvement at all. They use tools to hunt. They climb trees despite having no physical features that should allow it. Their blood destroys bacteria that modern medicine cannot touch. And a species biologists studied for a century has quietly turned out to be two species hiding in plain sight. Every one of these discoveries is recent, and everyone forced experts to rewrite what they thought they knew. Let's start with something that sounds like science fiction, but is fully documented in peer-reviewed research. In 2018, at a small reptile park in Costa Rica called Parque Reptilandia, a female American crocodile named Coquita laid a clutch of eggs. Nothing unusual about that, except for one detail. Coquita had lived completely alone in her enclosure for 16 years. No male crocodile had been anywhere near her. Zookeepers assumed the eggs were simply infertile, as unfertilized eggs from isolated female reptiles often are. But they incubated them anyway. Most of the eggs failed to develop, which was expected. One of them did not. Inside, researchers found a fully formed crocodile fetus, stillborn, but developed enough that its organs, its skeleton, its scales were all fully recognizable. Warren Booth, a researcher at Virginia Tech who has spent over a decade studying this exact phenomenon, sequenced the fetus's DNA. The results stunned the herpetology world. The genetic material was a 99.9% match to the mother alone. There was no father. Coquita had produced offspring entirely on her own through a process called facultative parthenogenesis, essentially a virgin birth. This was the first confirmed case of this reproductive strategy ever recorded in any crocodile species on Earth. Scientists already knew that some sharks, certain lizards, a few snake species, and even critically endangered California condors could do this under specific conditions. But nobody expected to find it in crocodiles because crocodiles are among the closest living relatives to birds and, more importantly, to dinosaurs. Crocodiles, birds, and the extinct pterosaurs and dinosaurs all belong to a group called archosaurs, meaning ruling reptiles, descended from a common ancestor roughly 250 million years ago. If both birds and crocodiles retain the biological machinery for virgin birth, it strongly suggests ancient dinosaurs may have carried the same capability. In a twist that sounds pulled straight from Jurassic Park, isolating only female dinosaurs to prevent breeding might not have worked after all. As one researcher on the study put it, life may have found a way long before anyone imagined it could. Now let's talk about intelligence, because this is where crocodiles have quietly demolished one of biology's oldest assumptions. For most of modern scientific history, tool use was considered a defining marker of advanced cognition, reserved almost exclusively for primates. A handful of clever birds like crows and dolphins. Reptiles were assumed too primitive, running on pure instinct with no capacity for the forward planning that tool use requires. Then in 2007, zoologist Vladimir Dinets was observing mugger crocodiles in India and noticed something bizarre. Several crocodiles lay motionless in shallow water near a bird nesting colony, with small sticks and twigs balanced carefully across their snouts. At first, this looked like coincidence, maybe drifting debris, but Dinets kept watching and saw a wading bird approach one of the sticks, likely searching for nesting material, only for the crocodile to explode out of the water and nearly catch it. That single observation launched a full investigation. Dinets and his colleagues spent a year systematically observing mugger crocodiles in India and American alligators across 4 sites in Louisiana. The stick balancing behavior appeared almost exclusively during the specific seasonal window when local birds were actively building nests. Outside that narrow breeding season, the behavior essentially disappeared. This meant the crocodiles were not randomly collecting floating debris. They were deliberately using the sticks as bait and understood the seasonal timing of their prey well enough to exploit it, holding perfectly still for hours waiting for a bird to take it. This was the first documented case of tool use in any reptile in the history of science, and the first known instance of any predator timing a lure to its prey's seasonal breeding behavior. Researchers now understand crocodilian brains contain a distinct cerebral cortex capable of memory, reasoning, and complex decision-making, structures long assumed to exist only in birds and mammals. Here is another one that genuinely upended expert assumptions. Crocodiles climb trees, not stumbling onto low branches near the water's edge, but genuinely climbing, sometimes into the canopy. This sounds absurd once you picture a crocodile's body: short legs, a heavy armored tail, none of the claws, gripping toe pads, or flexible joints that climbing animals rely on. For years, any report of a tree-climbing crocodile was dismissed as a tall tale. Then Dinace, the same researcher behind the tool use discovery, investigated properly, studying crocodile populations across Australia, Africa, and North America, combining field observation with historical records and photographic evidence. The results were undeniable. At least 4 crocodilian species were confirmed to climb trees, with juveniles occasionally spotted as high as 9 meters, close to 30 feet above the ground. Smaller crocodiles climbed nearly vertical trunks, while larger adults used angled trunks and low branches. In one striking account, researchers in Australia even watched a crocodile attempt to scale a chain link fence. Scientists believe the behavior serves 2 purposes: better sunlight for regulating body temperature when ground level basking spots are limited, and an elevated vantage point to scan for prey and threats. But the most important implication concerns paleontology. Researchers studying fossilized crocodile skeletons had always concluded these animals could not have possessed climbing ability, because nothing in their bone structure suggested it. As Dinetz put it, if crocodiles went extinct today and future scientists only had their bones, nobody would ever guess they could climb trees, because the physical evidence simply does not show it. Now, for something that sounds almost too strange to be real, but is documented in the fossil record, long before modern crocodiles existed, Australia was home to a different group called Mekosuchini crocodiles, which dominated the continent's inland ecosystems for tens of millions of years. Recent analysis of some of the oldest crocodile eggshells ever found, unearthed at the Murgon fossil site in Queensland, revealed these ancient relatives filled ecological roles nothing like the crocodiles we know today. Evidence suggests some Mekosuchini species were primarily terrestrial hunters, actively stalking prey on land. Even stranger, some researchers believe certain species may have ambushed prey by dropping down from trees, a hunting style with no true equivalent among crocodilians alive today. For a family of animals so often reduced to one image, a submerged ambush predator at a riverbank, this is a reminder that crocodilian evolution produced far stranger creatures than most people realize. Let's move to something with genuinely massive implications for human medicine. Crocodiles are notorious for violent territorial combat. Adults regularly bite, claw, and even tear limbs off one another during dominance disputes, and these fights happen in murky, bacteria-saturated water. the exact environment where an open wound on almost any other animal would become fatally infected within days. Yet crocodiles routinely walk away from these encounters, heal within days to weeks, and rarely develop the kind of infection that would be a near certain death sentence for a human. For decades, this was treated as folklore among people who worked with these animals. Then, scientists tested it. In laboratory studies, researchers exposed crocodile blood serum and human blood serum to 23 separate strains of pathogenic bacteria. Human serum killed only 8 of those 23 strains. Crocodile serum destroyed all 23, including MRSA, one of the most feared antibiotic-resistant infections in modern hospitals. In separate experiments, crocodile blood components neutralized certain lab cultures of the human immunodeficiency virus. Scientists eventually identified the source, a class of molecules called antimicrobial peptides, which crocodilian blood contains in unusually high concentrations and diversity. These peptides attack invading microbes almost instantly, well before the slower antibody-based immune response most vertebrates, including humans, rely on as their primary defense. Beyond the antimicrobial effects, studies have found anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and wound healing properties, along with remarkable regenerative capabilities in damaged tissue. None of this means crocodile blood is a miracle cure ready for human use. Raw crocodile blood is not something anyone should consume or apply to a wound, and turning these compounds into actual medicine requires years of purification, synthesis, and clinical trials. But pharmaceutical researchers worldwide are now studying these peptides as blueprints for a new generation of antibiotics, precisely because the world is running dangerously low on drugs that still work against resistant bacteria. Crocodiles have spent roughly 80 million years surviving as armored predators in some of the most microbe-rich environments on the planet, sustaining violent injuries from their own kind. Evolution has already run millions of years of experiments on bacterial resistance, and human scientists are only now learning to read the results. Here's something that surprised even the scientists who found it. When researchers sequenced full crocodilian genomes and compared the mutation rate to birds, their closest living relatives, they found crocodilians evolve at roughly 1/4 the speed of birds, and their overall rate of genetic change is an order of magnitude slower than mammals. Researchers describe this as puzzling, because an extremely slow mutation rate should, in theory, make it harder to maintain genetic diversity over long timescales. Yet crocodilians have persisted for well over 80 million years, surviving the exact asteroid impact that wiped out every non-avian dinosaur on the planet. One explanation ties back to generation length. Larger animals with longer times between generations accumulate mutations more slowly. And the fossil record confirms the basic crocodilian body plan has stayed remarkably unchanged for tens of millions of years, in sharp contrast to mammals, which exploded into wildly different shapes and sizes after the extinction that ended the age of dinosaurs. Researchers also used this unusually slow genetic clock to look further back in time than is possible with faster evolving animals, discovering that crocodile and gharial populations crashed sharply during the most recent ice age, while alligators in more temperate regions show a long, steady decline across an entire geological epoch. Slow evolution, it turns out, does not mean simple. Crocodilian immune genes have diversified in patterns unlike anything seen in birds or other reptiles, likely a major piece of the puzzle behind their extraordinary disease resistance. Now, here is a discovery that might change how you think about crocodile eggs entirely. Long before a crocodile ever hatches, while still sealed inside its shell, it is already communicating. researchers monitoring Nile crocodile nests recorded pre-hatching calls, sounds the nearly developed embryos make from inside the egg just before hatching. When scientists played these calls back to eggs that had not yet started vocalizing, the embryos that heard real hatching calls began moving and responding far more than embryos that heard random noise, while eggs incubated in silence showed almost no movement. This appears to synchronize the entire clutch, so dozens of siblings buried in the same nest all hatch within roughly the same window, rather than emerging over scattered days that would leave early hatchlings exposed. But the calls do not stop at siblings. The mother is listening too. In controlled playback experiments, researchers hid speakers underground near nests and played these embryonic calls. Female crocodiles reacted, moving toward the sound, and in most cases began digging open the nest in direct response to hearing her unborn offspring. Interestingly, mothers did not respond the moment a single embryo started calling. The calling needed to become almost continuous, from multiple embryos at once before a mother committed to digging, suggesting she waits until the evidence shows the entire clutch is ready to emerge together. Scientists believe this acoustic communication between unhatched offspring and a parent may be an ancient trait shared broadly across archosaurs, likely existing in the ancestors of modern birds, and quite possibly in dinosaurs themselves. One more finding deserves mention. Researchers studying how crocodiles respond to sound played recordings of human infant distress cries near captive Nile crocodiles and dwarf crocodiles. The crocodiles reacted strongly, moving toward the speaker despite having zero evolutionary history with humans specifically. Scientists believe this is not about human infants at all, but about acoustic properties distress cries share across an enormous range of species, sudden pitch shifts, and harsh, irregular tones that likely marked vulnerable, easy prey throughout millions of years of crocodilian evolution long before humans existed. These animals are not operating on blind instinct. They are actively parsing sound in sophisticated ways, and that ancient listening system may be exactly what let their ancestors survive as apex predators for tens of millions of years. Which brings us back to where this all started. In 2025, researchers led by biologist Hans Larsen at McGill University set out to study crocodile populations living in isolation on two small landmasses off Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, the island of Cozumel and the atoll of Banco Chinchorro. For nearly a century, every crocodile on those islands had simply been classified as American crocodiles, part of one single widespread species ranging from Baja California all the way down to Venezuela and across the entire Caribbean. Working with local volunteers, the team captured animals, collected blood and scale samples, and released them safely back into the wild. When they sequenced the DNA and compared skull structure and physical features against known American crocodiles from across that massive range, the results did not match what anyone expected. The genetic divergence was striking enough that the lead researcher described the results as, in his own words, totally unexpected. What scientists had assumed for generations was one single, well-understood species turned out to be at least two entirely separate species, each isolated on its own small island, each numbering fewer than 1,000 individuals, and each previously invisible to science simply because nobody had looked closely enough. Take a moment to really sit with that. This was not some newly explored jungle or a remote, unstudied region. This was Cozumel, one of the most visited tourist destinations in Mexico, a place millions of people have vacationed for decades. And yet an entire distinct species of crocodile had been living there in plain sight the whole time, hiding behind a case of mistaken identity that lasted for generations. As lead researcher Larson put it, biodiversity is disappearing faster than we can even discover what we stand to lose, Both of these newly identified populations are now considered critically vulnerable, and conservationists are pushing for immediate protective status, specifically because rapid coastal development threatens to destroy their entire habitat before formal recognition can even be completed. So here is where this leaves us. Crocodiles can reproduce without a mate. They plan and execute hunting strategies using tools timed precisely to their prey's breeding season. They climb trees despite lacking any physical trait that should make that possible. Their blood contains some of the most powerful antimicrobial compounds ever documented in the animal kingdom. Their genome mutates at a crawl compared to almost anything else alive, yet their immune system has diversified in ways scientists are still working to understand. Their unborn young are already talking to each other, and their mothers from inside a sealed egg. And an entire hidden species lived on one of the most visited islands in the Western Hemisphere without anyone noticing for 100 years. For over 200 million years, crocodiles have watched empires rise and fall, watched every dinosaur disappear, and quietly kept surviving while barely changing on the outside. We are still only scratching the surface of how they actually did it. Scientists thought they knew crocodiles. They were wrong. And there is a good chance we still are.